Elias adjusted his pack, the weight familiar and comforting. He turned around to point out the sudden break in the canopy where the sun was hitting the moss just right, intending to tell Clara it looked like gold dust. "Look at that, Claire," he said, a smile already forming on his lips. "Ack." But the words hung in the air, unanswered. "Ack." The trail behind him, which had been filled with the soft crunch of her boots only seconds ago, was empty. Just a winding path of dirt and roots disappearing into a sudden, thick wall of gray fog. He laughed nervously, thinking she was hiding. But as the silence stretched from 10 seconds to a minute, the cold dread in his stomach told him something the rest of his mind refused to believe. She wasn't hiding, she was gone. The car wound its way through the twisting roads of Gatlinburg, the engine humming a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the beating of Elias's heart. It was late October. Great Smoky Mountains were setting themselves on fire with color-burning reds, deep oranges, and brilliant golds that seemed to glow against the backdrop of the evergreen firs. Elias glanced over at the passenger seat. Clara had her window rolled down, her hand riding the wind like a surfer on a wave. The cool mountain air whipped her dark hair around her face, but she didn't care. She was laughing. That bright, unfiltered laugh that had made Elias fall in love with her 5 years ago in a dusty college library. This trip was supposed to be their reset. Life in the city had been grinding them down, the long hours, the cramped apartment, the endless noise of traffic and construction. They needed silence. They needed the ancient, heavy presence of the mountains to remind them of what actually mattered. They had rented a small cabin near the trailhead of a lesser-known path, one that promised seclusion and the kind of views that you usually only saw on postcards. They had planned this for months. Every detail was meticulously arranged, from the trail maps downloaded to Elias's phone to the bottle of wine tucked away in his backpack for when they reached the summit. They parked the car at the trailhead. It was a gravel lot, mostly empty, save for one other dust-covered truck that looked like it had been there for days. The air here was different. It smelled of damp earth, decaying leaves, and pine Arizona, sharp, clean scent that filled the lungs and cleared the head. Elias shouldered his pack, feeling the familiar strain of the straps. He checked his supplies one last time: water, first aid, a map, a compass, rain jackets. He was always the careful one, the planner. Clara was the spirit. She was already out of the car, tying her boots, her eyes scanning the tree line with an eagerness that made her look like a child on Christmas morning. "Come on, Slowpoke," she teased, grabbing her hiking poles. "Ow." The mountains aren't going to climb themselves. Elias locked the car, the chirp of the alarm echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet woods. He walked over to her and kissed her forehead. "We have all day, Claire. Let's just enjoy it." She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the canopy of trees above. "I know," she whispered. "I just have a feeling. Today is going to be perfect." We started the ascent. The trail was narrow, a ribbon of packed dirt winding through massive hardwoods that towered like cathedral pillars. For the first hour, the hike was everything they had hoped for. The incline was gentle, the ground soft underfoot. They talked about everything and nothing: their plans to buy a house, the dog they wanted to adopt, the strange dream Elias had the night before about flying over a gray ocean. It was the kind of conversation that flows effortlessly between two people who know the landscape of each other's souls. As they climbed higher, the vegetation began to change. The hardwoods gave way to spruce and fir, the air growing cooler and thinner. The light filtered through the dense branches and shafts, illuminating patches of ferns and moss that looked prehistoric. It felt like stepping back in time, into a world that existed long before highways and cell phones. Elias checked his watch. It was just past noon. "We should stop for lunch soon," he said, looking back at Clara. She was a few paces behind him, stopping to take a picture of a strange orange mushroom growing on a rotting log. "Just a little further," she called out. "I want to get to that ridge we saw on the map. The view is supposed to be incredible." Elias nodded, turning back to the trail, trusted her energy. She was always pushing them a little further, a little higher, and it was usually worth it. The path grew steeper, more rugged. Roots crisscrossed the ground like the veins of the mountain, slick with moisture. The weather in the Smokies is a living thing. It breathes and shifts with a mind of its own. One moment, the sky was a piercing blue. The next, heavy gray clouds began to roll over the peaks, spilling down the slopes like water. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in a matter of minutes. "You might want to grab that jacket," Elias said, pausing to pull his own windbreaker from his pack. He waited for Clara to catch up. She arrived breathless, cheeks flushed pink from the exertion. "It's getting spooky," she said, pulling on her fleece. "I love it." They pressed on, but the atmosphere had changed. The birds, which had been chattering all morning, fell silent. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves with a sound like whispering paper. A thick fog began to creep through the trees, not falling from the sky, but rising from the ground, wrapping around the trunks and obscuring the path ahead. It was the famous smoke of the mountains, beautiful and disorienting. "Stay close," Elias said, his voice sounding flat in the damp air. "Visibility is dropping." "I'm right behind you," Clara replied. Her voice was close, reassuring. Elias focused on his footing. The trail had become rocky, navigating a series of switchbacks that hugged the side of the mountain. To his left was a steep drop-off, disappearing into the white void of the mist. To his right, the dense wall of the forest. He walked for another 10 minutes, the fog growing so thick he could barely see his own boots. He stopped to check the map on his phone, but the signal was dead. A small icon of a cloud with a slash through it stared back at him. "Hey," he said, turning around. "Maybe we should head back down. It's getting too thick." There was no answer. Elias stared at the trail behind him. It was empty. The gray mist swirled sluggishly, filling the space where Clara should have been. "Clara?" he said, louder this time. Silence. Just the wind sighing through the spruce needles. He felt a prickle of irritation. She must have stopped to tie her shoe or take another picture. "Clara, come on, it's not funny, let's go." Still nothing. The irritation dissolved instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline. He took a few steps back down the trail. "Clara," he shouted, his voice cracking. He broke into a jog, retracing their steps. He ran for maybe 50 yards, scanning the woods on either side. "Clara, answer me." He stopped. He listened. The forest was impossibly quiet. No footsteps. No rustling fabric. No voice. It was as if the mountain had simply swallowed her whole. He looked at the ground, searching for footprints. In the damp earth, he saw his own boot prints clearly, and there, next to them, were hers. Smaller, lighter. He followed them with his eyes. They continued up the trail, right behind his, and then, ... they just stopped. They didn't veer off into the woods. They didn't slide down the embankment. They just ended, as if she had been lifted straight into the sky. Panic is a physical thing. It starts in the chest, a tightening that makes it hard to breathe, then spreads to the limbs, making the hand shake and the knees weak. Elias spun in a circle, screaming her name until his throat felt raw. "Clara, Clara." The fog swallowed his voice, dampening the sound, keeping it close. He checked his watch. 1:15 p.m. She had been right behind him 5 minutes ago. He began to search frantically, scrambled down the steep embankment, sliding on the wet leaves, tearing his hands on briars. "Clara, are you hurt? Can you hear me?" He searched for an hour, then 2. He ran up the trail, then down. He blew the emergency whistle attached to his backpack strap 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for distress. The piercing sound echoed off the invisible cliffs, but the only reply was the wind. As the afternoon wore on, the light began to fail. The fog turned from white to a bruising purple, then to charcoal. The temperature plummeted. Elias was exhausted, his clothes soaked with sweat and mist, his mind racing with terrifying scenarios. Had she fallen? Had someone taken her? But they hadn't seen a soul for hours. He knew the rule. If you are lost, stay put. If you are searching, go for help before dark. But leaving felt like betrayal. Leaving meant admitting she was gone. He stood at the spot where her footprints ended, shining his flashlight into the encroaching night. "I'm coming back," he whispered to the trees. "I promise I'm coming back." The run down the mountain was a blur of terror. Elias stumbled, fell, got up, and ran again. Reached the car just as true night settled over the Smokies. Fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped them twice. He drove to the nearest ranger station, speeding around the curves, risking his own life to save hers. The ranger station was a beacon of yellow light in the darkness. Elias burst through the doors, startling the officer behind the desk. "My wife," he gasped, collapsing against the counter. "My wife is gone. The trail, ... the fog. She just vanished." The search began within the hour. It was a massive operation. Search and rescue teams, dogs, volunteers. They flooded the woods with lights and noise. Elias wanted to go back up with them, but they made him stay at the base. Wrapping him in a shock blanket and handing him a cup of coffee he couldn't drink, he sat on the bumper of an ambulance, staring up at the black silhouette of the mountain. He felt a profound, crushing guilt. He was the protector. He was the one who was supposed to keep her safe. And he had lost her. Days turned into a week. The search continued, but the urgency began to fade, replaced by a grim determination. The weather did not cooperate. Heavy rains turned the trails into mudslides, washing away any potential evidence. The dogs picked up a scent near the ridge, but lost it at the edge of a steep ravine. Divers checked the mountain pools. Helicopters scanned the canopy with thermal imaging. Nothing. No heat signature. No discarded backpack. No body. Elias didn't sleep. He stayed in a motel in Gatlinburg, refusing to go home. Every morning at dawn, he was at the command center. Every evening, he waited for the team leader to come out and shake his head. The hope that she was injured and waiting for rescue slowly transformed into the agonizing realization that she might never be found. The psychological toll was devastating. Elias replayed those final moments in his head 1,000 times a day. Why didn't I look back sooner? Why didn't I hold her hand? Why did I let us get separated in the fog? He analyzed every word she had said, looking for a clue, a premonition. Today is going to be perfect. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. After 2 weeks, the official search was suspended. "We've covered the area 3 times, son," the sheriff told him, his hand resting gently on Elias's shoulder. "The woods, sometimes they just don't give people back. We have to be realistic." Elias went home to the city, but he didn't return to his life. How could he? The apartment was a museum of Clara. Her book was still on the nightstand, bookmarked at page 142. Her coffee mug was in the sink. Her smell lavender and vanilla lingered on her pillows. He couldn't touch anything. He slept on the couch, leaving the bedroom exactly as she had left it. He kept her phone line active. He called it every night just to hear her voicemail greeting. "Hi, you've reached Clara. I'm probably out taking pictures or getting lost somewhere wonderful. Leave a message." The cheerfulness of her voice was a knife in his heart. He would leave long, rambling messages, telling her about his day, apologizing, begging her to come home. 5 years later, Elias had slowly, painfully begun to function again. He went to work, he ate, he smiled occasionally. But he never remarried. He never dated. His heart was a sealed room, and Clara held the only key. One Tuesday afternoon, his phone rang. It was a Tennessee area code. His heart stopped. He answered, his hand trembling just as it had that first night. "Elias, this is Ranger Davies from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park." "I'm here," Elias whispered. "We found something," the ranger said, his voice somber. A hiking group went off trail near the western ridge, miles from where? Miles from the search zone. They found a backpack. Elias drove through the night. He arrived at the station as the sun was rising, painting the mountains in the same brilliant golds and reds as that day 5 years ago. Ranger Davies led him into a back room. On a metal table sat a backpack. It was faded, covered in moss and dirt, the fabric torn by animals. But Elias knew it instantly. It was blue with a yellow patch from Yosemite. Clara's pack. Did you find... ... Elias couldn't finish the sentence. No, the ranger said softly. Just the pack. It looks like it was wedged in a crevice, maybe to protect it from the rain. We found this inside. He handed Elias a plastic bag. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. The dampness had warped the pages, but the ink was waterproof. Elias opened it with shaking fingers. It was her handwriting. The entries were dated from the days after she went missing. Day 1. The fog is so thick. Took a step off the trail to look at a flower and slipped. I slid so far down. My ankle is broken. I called for Elias, but the wind is too loud. I'll come back. I know he'll come back. Day 2. It's cold. I managed to crawl under a rock shelf, but I can hear helicopters, but they are so far away. I used the whistle, but I don't think they can hear me over the water. I'm scared, Elias. I'm so scared. Day 3. The pain is gone now. I'm just tired. The woods are beautiful, actually. The stars are so bright. I dreamed of our apartment last night. I dreamed we were old and gray, sitting on the porch. Day 4. I don't think I'm going to make it out of here. My battery died. To whoever finds this, tell Elias I didn't suffer. Tell him I wasn't afraid at the end. Tell him I love him. Love him more than these mountains. Elias, don't be sad. Live a big life for me. I'll be waiting in the mist. The writing trailed off. Elias wept until his ribs ached, till there were no tears left. But for the first time in 5 years, the crushing weight of the unknown was lifted. She hadn't vanished into thin air. She had fought. She had lived. And her last thoughts had been of him. It wasn't the ending he wanted. It was a tragedy deep and irrevocable. But it was an ending. Requested to be taken to the spot where the pack was found. It was a beautiful, secluded hollow, sheltered by ancient hemlocks. A stream trickled nearby, the sound soothing and constant. It was a peaceful place to rest. Elias didn't bring flowers, he brought a camera. He sat in the hollow for a long time talking to her, reading her the entries from her journal, telling her that he heard her. He told her he loved her. Before he left, he took a small stone from the creek bed and placed it where the pack had been found. He stood up and looked around. The woods were no longer a place of terror. They were a cathedral, a sanctuary holding the spirit of the woman he loved. "Goodbye, Claire," he whispered. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a fleeting second, the sun broke through the canopy, illuminating the moss like gold dust. Elias walked back to the trail. Grief was still there, heavy and sharp, but the panic was gone. He walked out of the woods, carrying her memory not as a burden, but as a part of himself. The mountains kept their secrets, but love, he realized, was the one thing that could not be lost, not even in the deepest mist.